Long before the era of billionaire athletes and global brands, the parameters of this sport were redefined by a single kid from Brazil. Edson Arantes do Nascimento grew up in Bauru, an industrial city in the state of São Paulo, far from the polished pitches of Europe. His family couldn't afford a leather football, so he learned to play in the dirt streets, kicking a rolled-up sock stuffed with newspaper. His father, Dondinho, had been a promising professional striker himself, known for his heading ability. But a severe knee injury abruptly ended his career, plunging the household into deep financial insecurity and leaving his mother terrified of the sport. On July 16, 1950, the country gathered around radios for the World Cup final. Brazil was the heavy favorite to win the title on home soil against Uruguay, but the match ended in a shocking 2-1 defeat. It was a moment of profound national trauma, and for 9-year-old Edson, the shock was entirely personal. For the first time in his life, he saw his father cry. In an instinctive attempt to soothe the pain that couldn't be undone, the boy made a solemn vow. He looked at his father and promised that one day he would win the World Cup for him. That promise anchored his entire trajectory, transforming football into a lifelong crusade of filial duty. He channeled that drive into formal training. By age 15, he traveled to the coastal city of Santos for a trial with their professional club. His mentor, the former national team player Waldemar de Brito, didn't hedge his bets when introducing the slender 130-pound teenager to the Santos directors. He told them flat out that this kid was going to be the greatest football player in the world. The directors didn't have to wait long for proof. Now answering to the nickname Pelé, he brought his raw, improvisational street style, known as O Jogo Bonito, the beautiful game, to the senior squad. He scored in his professional debut and immediately held his own against grown men. Within months, he escalated to the top of the league's scoring charts. By age 16, he had already earned a call-up to the Brazilian national team, scoring his first international goal. Pelé's explosive entry onto the professional stage proved that a completely unpolished, kinetic genius could dismantle established, rigid tactics with sheer physical intuition. That intuition faced its ultimate test at the 1958 World Cup in Sweden. The Brazilian Football Federation had brought a psychologist to assess the squad. His data-driven conclusion was that the 17-year-old Pelé was too young to handle the physical and mental pressures of the tournament. Brazil's coach, Vicente Feola, ignored the scientific assessment entirely. Even though Pelé was carrying a severe knee injury from a pre-tournament warm-up, Feola took the gamble and put the teenager in the starting lineup. The result was an eruption. Pelé tore through the tournament, scoring a hat-trick against France in the semifinal and netting 2 stunning goals to secure a 5-2 victory over the host nation, Sweden, in the final. When the final whistle blew, the weight of the moment caught up to him. Overcome with emotion, he found a radio to call his father back in Bauru. 8 years later, the promise was kept. He returned to Brazil not as a teenager, but as a global phenomenon. Wealthy European clubs scrambled to sign him, prompting the Brazilian president to legally declare Pelé an official national treasure to block his transfer abroad. Fulfilling the vow to his father changed his reality. He was no longer playing for himself, but carrying the expectations of an entire country. As the 1960s began, opponents across the globe realized a dark truth. Tactical superiority was useless against him. To stop Pelé, teams had to resort to targeted physical violence. He arrived at the 1962 World Cup in Chile as the undisputed best player on the planet. But during Brazil's second group match, he suffered a severe adductor muscle tear, forcing him to watch from the sidelines as his teammates secured their second consecutive title. By 1966, the situation deteriorated entirely. Brazil arrived at the World Cup in England with an aging, disorganized squad, walking straight into a hostile environment dominated by highly structured physical European teams. Defenders weaponized blunt force. In matches against Bulgaria and Portugal, Pelé was subjected to a series of cynical, calculated tackles designed specifically to remove him from the pitch. The strategy worked. Severely injured, Pelé limped off as Brazil faced a humiliating early elimination. Heartbroken and disillusioned by the brutality, he vowed to never play in a World Cup again. The systematic fouls in England stripped away the innocence of the street game. For a player defined by creative flair, the pitch had become a place of physical survival. Yet the story didn't end in England. By 1970, Pelé was coaxed out of international retirement for the World Cup in Mexico. But this time, the Brazilian squad was backed by the resources of a military dictatorship. This animated chart illustrates a shift to precise, scientific preparation. Utilizing NASA's research on altitude and cardiovascular stress, technocrats designed a rigorous conditioning program. The metrics climbed, allowing the 1970 squad to outlast opponents in the intense heat of Mexico. In the final against Italy, this scientifically prepared Brazilian side completely dismantled the rigid European defensive tactics. Pelé orchestrated the attack, scoring 1 goal and setting up 2 others in a resounding 4-1 victory. The win secured Brazil their 3rd World Cup championship, allowing them to permanently retire the Jules Rimet trophy. 1970 was a highly calculated resurrection. It proved that athletic brilliance, when married with intense scientific discipline, becomes entirely unstoppable. With nothing left to prove on the international stage, Pelé transitioned out of Brazil in the mid-1970s. He signed with the New York Cosmos, bringing his star power to North America and injecting the sport directly into the American cultural mainstream. Later, he stepped off the pitch entirely and into politics. Serving as Brazil's extraordinary minister for sports, he drafted the Pelé Law, reforming domestic sports contracts to protect future generations of young athletes from exploitation. Across a career yielding over 1,000 goals, his identity expanded entirely. The barefoot kid from Bauru evolved into the definitive global ambassador for the sport. Looking back at the boy who made a promise to a weeping father, his legacy is defined by a decade of fulfillment. He began a journey to stop his father's tears, and he finished it as the sport's most enduring icon.